In 10 minutes, you'll wish you hadn't said that. Those were the words Danielle Brooks calmly spoke while standing beside a gas pump on the outskirts of Fort Cavett, Texas, her hands resting at her sides as a crowd of strangers watched in stunned silence. At that moment, nobody believed her. Not the customers recording on their phones. Not the store manager glaring from the doorway. And certainly not Officer Ethan Walker, who had just informed her that she was being detained. But what nobody at that gas station knew was that the next 5 minutes would change several lives forever. 2 hours earlier, Danielle's morning had begun like any other. The 42-year-old nonprofit consultant had left her home before sunrise, driving her dark blue SUV east along Interstate 10 with a garment bag hanging neatly in the back seat. Inside that bag was a formal Navy dress she planned to wear later that afternoon at a private military ceremony. Her husband, General Marcus Brooks, had spent the previous 8 months overseas, and although Danielle knew very little about the classified nature of his assignment, she had been told that today's ceremony was important. Very important. She smiled as she drove, sipping coffee and listening to a local country station. It was a clear Texas morning, already climbing toward 80 degrees despite the early hour. About 30 miles from Fort Cavett Air Base, Danielle noticed that her fuel gauge had dropped lower than expected. She exited the highway and pulled into a busy roadside gas station just after 8:15 a.m. The station was crowded with commuters, delivery drivers, and military families heading toward the nearby base. Danielle inserted her credit card, selected regular unleaded, and began filling her tank. A few seconds later, the pump abruptly stopped. Confused, she looked at the screen. The display flashed an error message she had never seen before. Thinking it was a simple technical issue, Danielle checked her banking app and immediately noticed that a charge of $78 had already been processed. Yet only a few gallons had entered her vehicle. Shaking her head, she locked her SUV and walked inside to speak with the manager. She expected the entire issue to take maybe 2 minutes. Instead, before she even reached the counter, she noticed several employees whispering while glancing in her direction. One employee hurried toward the office in the back. Another picked up the store phone. Danielle had no idea that, at that exact moment, someone inside the station had already reported her as a suspected gas thief. Danielle approached the counter with her phone already open to her banking application. Behind the register stood a middle-aged manager wearing a name tag that read Frank Miller. Before Danielle could explain what had happened, Frank looked up and said, "Ma'am, are you the one at pump number 6? Danielle nodded politely. "Yes, the pump stopped after a few gallons, but my card was charged $78. I just need someone to reset it or issue a refund." Instead of checking the register, Frank narrowed his eyes toward the parking lot. "Our system says the transaction was incomplete." Danielle calmly turned her screen around. "The charge already went through. You can see it right here." Frank barely glanced at the phone. "Well, from where I am standing, it looks like you pumped gas and then came inside after the system flagged it." Danielle frowned, surprised by his tone. "I came inside because the machine stopped working. I have no problem paying. In fact, according to my bank, I already did." Frank folded his arms. "You would be surprised how many people say that." Danielle took a slow breath. She had dealt with customer service issues before and knew becoming emotional rarely helped. "Could you please check your payment records? There has to be a mistake." For a moment, it seemed Frank might actually look into the matter. Instead, an employee emerged from the office and quietly handed him a printed receipt. Frank glanced at it and immediately reached for the store telephone. Danielle watched as he stepped several feet away and spoke in a lowered voice. She could not hear everything, but she distinctly caught the words "possible fuel theft" and "suspect still on location." Danielle felt a knot form in her stomach. When Frank returned, she asked directly, "Did you just call the police?" Frank did not answer immediately. "Store policy requires us to report suspicious activity involving unpaid fuel." Danielle stared at him in disbelief. "You have my credit card information. My vehicle is still parked at the pump, and I am standing right here trying to resolve the problem. How exactly is that suspicious?" Frank shrugged. "That is not my decision. Several customers had begun watching the exchange. A young woman near the coffee station quietly shook her head, while an older man near the checkout line whispered something to his wife. Danielle looked around, suddenly aware that people were staring at her as though she had done something wrong. She checked the time on her phone. 8:23 in the morning. She still had plenty of time before she needed to reach the base, but she could already feel the morning slipping away. "I would like your corporate office number," Danielle said firmly. Before Frank could respond, the sound of a police cruiser pulling into the parking lot echoed through the front windows. Frank glanced outside and said, almost with relief, "You can explain everything to them." Danielle turned toward the front windows just as two patrol vehicles rolled into the gas station parking lot. The blue and white cruisers parked side by side near pump number 6, and within seconds, two officers stepped out. The first was a tall white officer with close-cropped blonde hair and mirrored sunglasses. His badge identified him as Officer Ethan Walker. The second officer, younger and slightly shorter, was Officer Kyle Bennett. Both men walked toward the entrance with the confident stride of people who believed they already understood the situation. Frank immediately waved them over the moment they entered. "Officers, thank goodness you are here," he said loudly enough for everyone inside to hear. "That is the woman right there." Danielle felt every eye in the store shift toward her again. Officer Walker approached without introducing himself. "Ma'am, we received a report that you attempted to leave without paying for fuel." Danielle kept her voice calm. "Officer, there has been a misunderstanding. The pump malfunctioned. My bank account was charged, and I came inside to resolve it." She held out her phone. "I can show you the transaction right now." Walker did not look at the screen. Instead, he asked, "Did you pump gas?" "Yes." "Did the transaction complete?" "According to my bank, yes. According to the store, it did not." Danielle blinked in surprise. "Which is exactly why I came inside instead of driving away." Several customers nodded quietly, but Walker seemed uninterested. He glanced toward Frank. "Did she attempt to leave?" Frank hesitated for a brief moment. Her vehicle was still outside, but the system flagged the transaction. Walker nodded as though that answered everything. Danielle noticed Kyle Bennett watching silently from a few feet away, occasionally glancing at her phone screen. "Officer," Danielle said, maintaining her composure, "all of this can be cleared up in less than a minute if someone simply checks the payment processor." Walker crossed his arms. "People tell us stories all the time." Danielle stared at him. "This is not a story. It is a banking transaction." She extended her phone again. "Please look." Walker finally glanced downward, but only for a second. "Screenshots can be altered." Danielle lowered the phone slowly. "This is not a screenshot. It is my live banking application." A murmur spread through the store. The older customer near the register quietly said, "Seems reasonable to me." Walker ignored him. "Ma'am, I need identification." Danielle immediately handed over her driver's license. Walker studied it for several seconds. "Danielle Brooks." "Yes." "Where are you headed this morning?" Danielle hesitated. The event she was attending was private, and Marcus had specifically asked her not to discuss details publicly. "I am traveling to Fort Cavett," she answered carefully. Walker narrowed his eyes. "For what purpose?" "Personal business." That answer appeared to confirm whatever suspicion had already formed in his mind. He handed the license to Bennett and said, "Run it." Danielle could sense the atmosphere changing. What had begun as a customer service dispute was quickly becoming something else entirely, and she still could not understand why. Officer Kyle Bennett returned a minute later, handing Danielle's license back to Ethan Walker. "License is valid. No warrants. Registration checks out too," he said quietly. Danielle expected that information to finally end the misunderstanding, but Walker barely reacted. Instead, he looked directly at her and asked, "Why were you reluctant to explain why you were going to Fort Cavett?" Danielle could hardly believe the conversation had shifted so far from a simple gas pump malfunction. "Officer, because it is personal," she replied evenly. I am under no obligation to discuss private family matters in order to prove that I paid for gasoline. Walker remained expressionless. People who avoid questions sometimes have something to hide. Danielle took a slow breath. Or sometimes people simply value their privacy. By now, nearly a dozen customers had gathered inside and outside the store. Several were openly recording with their phones. The young woman who had been standing near the coffee station stepped forward. "Officer." She came inside right away. "I saw the whole thing. She never tried to leave." Walker briefly turned toward the woman. "Thank you, ma'am. We will handle it from here." The witness stepped back, clearly frustrated. Danielle looked around the store and realized that although several people seemed sympathetic, nobody appeared willing to challenge the officers any further. Frank remained behind the counter, avoiding eye contact. "Officer Walker," Danielle said calmly, "may I ask a simple question? Has anyone actually verified with the payment processor whether the transaction went through?" Walker glanced at Frank. Frank shook his head. "Corporate handles payment disputes. We do not have direct access." Danielle stared at both men in disbelief. "So nobody has checked the payment records. Yet somehow I am being treated as though I committed a crime?" Walker's tone became firmer. "Ma'am, at this point we are investigating a complaint." Danielle nodded slowly. "Then investigate it. Contact the payment company. Contact my bank. I will gladly wait." For a brief moment, silence filled the store. Then Walker said something that instantly changed the atmosphere. "Step outside with us, please." Danielle frowned. "Am I being detained?" Walker answered, "At the moment, we are conducting an investigation, and I need your cooperation." Danielle knew enough about her rights to recognize that the situation was escalating. Still, she had nothing to hide. "Fine," she said quietly. She walked outside with both officers following closely behind. The Texas sun felt hotter now, and a growing crowd had begun watching from beside the gas pumps. Danielle stood next to her vehicle while Walker asked more questions about her destination, her occupation, and how long she had been in town. None of it seemed connected to the original issue. Finally, Danielle said, "Officer, respectfully, this conversation has gone far beyond a disputed gas purchase. I would like to call my attorney or a family member." Walker looked directly at her and replied, "That can wait. Right now, I need you to remain here until we sort this out." Danielle looked at her watch. It was 8:35 in the morning, and for the first time all day, she began to worry that she might not make it to Fort Cavett on time. Danielle looked from Officer Walker to Officer Bennett and realized that neither man seemed interested in resolving the payment issue anymore. The original problem had almost disappeared beneath layers of suspicion and unnecessary questions. She checked her phone again. The charge from the gas station was still pending in her banking application, exactly where it had been 20 minutes earlier. "Officer, I would like to show you something one more time," Danielle said, holding up her phone. "This transaction is still visible. My bank has already authorized the payment." Walker barely glanced at the screen. "That does not necessarily mean the merchant received it." Danielle nodded. "Then let us call the bank together. We can settle this in 5 minutes." Walker shook his head. "We will determine the next steps." Danielle remained composed, but internally she was becoming increasingly concerned. She had promised Marcus that she would arrive at Fort Cavett before 10 o'clock. The ceremony organizers had stressed that guests needed to be seated early because security procedures would begin promptly. Missing the event was not an option. "I have an important appointment this morning," Danielle said. "I am willing to stay long enough to resolve this, but I cannot remain here indefinitely over a disputed fuel charge." Walker folded his arms. "That depends on the outcome of our investigation." Nearby, more customers had gathered around the pumps. Several people continued recording openly. One delivery driver quietly approached Officer Bennett. "Sir, I have been sitting over there for almost 15 minutes, he said, pointing toward his truck. "This lady has been cooperative the entire time." Bennett thanked him but did not respond further. Danielle noticed that Bennett seemed increasingly uncomfortable, yet he continued following Walker's lead. Frank stepped outside from the store carrying a clipboard. "Officer, corporate just sent a message," he announced. For a brief second Danielle felt hopeful. "What did they say?" she asked. Frank hesitated while reading the screen. "They said the transaction status is still unresolved." Walker immediately turned toward Danielle. "That means payment has not been confirmed." Danielle shook her head. "No, it means the system is still processing." "Those are not the same thing." Walker remained unconvinced. "Until we know for certain, you are not free to leave." Danielle stared at him in disbelief. "You are telling me that because of a payment processing delay, I cannot continue my day?" Walker answered, "I am telling you that I need complete cooperation." Danielle looked around at the growing crowd, then back at the officers. She understood that arguing would accomplish nothing. Instead, she made a decision. "Officer Walker, if I am not free to leave, then I would like to contact someone." Walker sighed impatiently. "Who exactly do you need to call?" Danielle met his gaze calmly. "Someone who can help clear this up very quickly." Officer Walker studied Danielle for several seconds before responding. "And who exactly is going to clear this up?" he asked. Danielle slipped her phone back into her purse. "Someone at Fort Cavett," she answered calmly. Walker let out a short laugh. "Ma'am, this is a local police matter. The military is not involved." Danielle nodded. "I understand that. But the people I need to contact are expecting me this morning, and they will know how to verify where I am supposed to be." Walker shook his head. "You can make a call later. Right now, I need you to remain here." Danielle looked around the parking lot. The crowd had grown even larger. Several customers had delayed leaving simply to watch what was happening. More phones were visible now. A man standing beside a pickup truck quietly said to another customer, "This is getting ridiculous." Danielle checked the time again. It was already 8:47. Every passing minute increased the likelihood that she would miss the event entirely. "Officer Walker," she said evenly, "I have cooperated with every request. I provided identification. I showed proof of payment. I answered your questions. I am simply asking to make a brief phone call." Walker remained firm. "Not yet." Danielle paused before speaking again. "Then am I officially being detained?" Walker exchanged a quick glance with Officer Bennett. "At this point, you are being temporarily held while we investigate." Danielle slowly exhaled. "Over a payment dispute that nobody has verified." Bennett shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should contact dispatch and see if they can help confirm the transaction status," he suggested quietly. Walker shook his head. "We already have enough information for now." Danielle noticed Bennett looking increasingly uneasy. It was clear that he was beginning to question how the situation was being handled. Just then, Frank hurried out of the store again. "Officer," he called, "corporate still cannot confirm the payment. They say the system outage is affecting multiple locations." Danielle immediately turned toward him. "Multiple locations?" Frank nodded. "Apparently several stations are experiencing delays this morning." Danielle stared at him. "So this entire situation may be the result of a system outage?" Frank hesitated. "Possibly." A murmur swept through the crowd. The young woman who had witnessed the original exchange spoke up again. "If their system is down everywhere, why is she still standing here?" Walker ignored the question. Instead, he looked at Danielle and said, "Until everything is verified, we are going to continue our investigation." Danielle could hardly believe what she was hearing. Even after learning about a possible company-wide outage, Walker refused to reconsider. She looked directly at him. "Officer, I am requesting one phone call. That is all." Walker folded his arms. "Who are you planning to call?" Danielle met his eyes without hesitation. "The Family Readiness Office at Fort Cavett." Walker smirked slightly. "And what exactly are they going to do?" Danielle's expression never changed. "You are about to find out." Officer Walker looked at Danielle for several long seconds before finally nodding toward her purse. "Make it quick," he said. Danielle thanked him, removed her phone, and stepped a few feet away from the growing crowd. The parking lot had become unusually quiet. Even the customers standing near the pumps seemed curious about what would happen next. Danielle scrolled through her contacts and selected a number she rarely used directly. The Family Readiness Office at Fort Cavett existed to support military families, coordinate events, and handle urgent situations involving service members and their spouses. Normally, Danielle would never have called them over something as minor as a gas station dispute. But this situation had stopped being minor nearly 30 minutes earlier. The call connected after only 2 rings. Fort Cavett Family Readiness Office. This is Staff Sergeant Lisa Ramirez speaking. How may I assist you? Danielle immediately recognized the voice. Good morning, Sergeant Ramirez. This is Danielle Brooks. I apologize for calling unexpectedly, but I am currently delayed about 30 miles west of the installation, and I may not arrive on time. There was a brief pause. Mrs. Brooks, are you all right? Danielle glanced toward the officers before answering. I am safe, but I am involved in a misunderstanding at a gas station. Local law enforcement is investigating a disputed fuel transaction, and I have been asked to remain here. The tone on the other end changed instantly. One moment, ma'am. Danielle waited quietly. Nearby, Officer Walker stood beside his patrol vehicle, clearly unconcerned. He appeared convinced that the call would accomplish nothing. Officer Bennett, however, continued watching Danielle with a more thoughtful expression. After less than 20 seconds, Sergeant Ramirez returned to the line. Mrs. Brooks, can you please confirm your location? Danielle provided the station address. Thank you, ma'am. Please remain where you are. Someone will contact you shortly. Danielle thanked her and ended the call. Walker approached immediately. That is it? He asked. Danielle slipped her phone back into her purse. That is it. Walker shook his head slightly. I hope you understand that calling the military does not change anything about this investigation. Danielle simply nodded. I understand. A customer standing nearby quietly asked, Everything okay, ma'am? Danielle offered a polite smile. I believe it will be. 8:54. Danielle checked the time again. Then she said something that several people nearby would later remember almost word for word. Officer Walker, I appreciate that you are doing your job, but in about 5 minutes, I believe this situation is going to look very different. Walker let out a small laugh. Ma'am, nobody important is coming to rescue you over a gas receipt. Danielle did not respond. She simply looked down at her watch and began silently counting the minutes. The next 2 minutes passed slowly. Danielle remained standing beside her SUV, calm and composed, while Officer Walker leaned against his patrol vehicle speaking casually with Frank. It was obvious that neither man expected anything significant to happen. Several customers had returned to pumping gas, but many stayed nearby, still watching. A few continued recording openly. Officer Bennett walked a short distance away and quietly spoke with dispatch through his radio. When he returned, his expression seemed more serious than before. Dispatch says there are reports of payment processing delays across several counties this morning, Bennett said. Walker shrugged. That still does not explain this specific transaction. Bennett hesitated. No, but it could explain why the payment has not shown up yet. Walker did not respond. Instead, he looked toward Danielle. Until we have confirmation, nothing changes. Danielle checked her watch again. 8:58. Almost exactly 4 minutes had passed since her call to Fort Cavett. She remained surprisingly calm. Years of military life had taught her patience. Plans changed. Situations escalated unexpectedly. Panic rarely solved anything. Still, she could not deny that she was disappointed. Marcus had spent months away from home, and today mattered. Missing even part of the ceremony would break both of their hearts. Suddenly, Officer Bennett's radio crackled loudly. Unit 12. Contact dispatch immediately by secure channel. Bennett looked surprised. Dispatch is requesting secure? Walker frowned. That is unusual. Bennett stepped several feet away to answer. Less than 30 seconds later, his posture changed completely. He turned toward Walker with a look Danielle had not seen before. Ethan, dispatch says the chief wants to speak with you right now. Walker looked irritated. About what? Bennett lowered his voice. They did not say. They just said immediately. Walker took the radio. This is Officer Walker. For a moment, nobody could hear the response. Then Walker's expression slowly shifted. The confidence disappeared from his face. Yes, Chief, he said. She is still here. He paused. No, sir. We have not transported anyone. Another pause. Walker glanced toward Danielle. Understood, sir. When the transmission ended, complete silence settled over the parking lot. Even the customers nearby sensed that something had changed. Walker stared at Danielle for several seconds before speaking. Mrs. Brooks, who exactly did you call? Danielle answered honestly. The Family Readiness Office. Walker shook his head slightly, as though trying to understand something that no longer made sense. Before he could ask another question, Bennett's radio activated again. This time, everyone standing nearby heard part of the message. Unit 12, remain on scene. The chief is en route. Repeat, remain on scene. Additional calls are expected. A murmur spread through the crowd. Frank looked visibly nervous. Danielle simply folded her hands and waited. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen and immediately recognized the number from Fort Cavett. As she answered, a calm voice said, Mrs. Brooks, this is Colonel Rebecca Hayes from Fort Cavett Command. We are aware of the situation. Please remain where you are. Senior leadership has already been notified. Danielle thanked Colonel Hayes and ended the call. She slipped her phone back into her purse and looked up to find every person in the parking lot staring at her. Officer Walker appeared noticeably unsettled now. Senior leadership? He repeated. Danielle nodded politely. Yes. Colonel Hayes said they are aware of the situation. Walker exchanged another uneasy glance with Bennett. Before anyone could say anything else, both officers' radios activated almost simultaneously. All units assigned to the gas station incident. Stand by for instructions from command. Seconds later, Walker's cell phone began ringing. He looked at the screen and immediately answered. Officer Walker speaking. His posture straightened instantly. Yes, Chief Reynolds. There was a long pause. Walker listened without interrupting. Several times he glanced toward Danielle. No, sir. She has been fully cooperative, he finally said. Another pause followed. Understood, sir. We will remain on scene. When the call ended, Walker slowly lowered the phone. The confidence that had defined his demeanor for the past 40 minutes was gone. Frank stepped cautiously out of the store. Officer, is everything okay? Walker ignored the question. Instead, he turned to Danielle. Mrs. Brooks, I have been instructed that the police chief is on his way personally. Danielle simply nodded. Thank you for letting me know. Frank looked confused. The chief? For a fuel dispute. Nobody answered him. A few moments later, Bennett approached Walker quietly. Although they spoke softly, several customers standing nearby overheard fragments of the conversation. Dispatch said calls came from Fort Cavett, Regional Command, and somebody at the Department of Defense Liaison Office. Walker stared at him. The Department of Defense? Bennett nodded. That is what dispatch said. News spread through the crowd almost instantly. Customers began whispering among themselves. One man muttered, Who exactly is this lady? Another person quietly replied, Apparently somebody very important. Danielle heard the comments but remained silent. She had never considered herself important. Years of military life had taught her that rank belonged to the service member, not the family. She had simply called the office responsible for military families because she was going to miss an event they expected her to attend. Yet somehow, that single phone call had triggered responses far beyond anything she anticipated. At exactly 9:10 in the morning, a black SUV bearing city government plates pulled into the parking lot. Chief Michael Reynolds stepped out almost immediately. The 60-year-old police chief was known throughout the county for rarely appearing at routine calls. His presence alone transformed the atmosphere. He walked directly toward Walker. Report, he said calmly. Walker summarized the incident in less than 2 minutes. Reynolds listened without expression. When Walker finished, the chief asked a single question. Has anyone confirmed whether payment was actually received? Silence followed. Finally, Frank spoke. Corporate just called, Chief. The payment went through 20 minutes ago. The delay was caused by the network outage. Reynolds closed his eyes briefly. Then he opened them and looked directly at Danielle. Mrs. Brooks, I believe we need to have a conversation. Chief Reynolds stepped a few feet away from the crowd and motioned for Danielle to join him near his vehicle. Unlike everyone else that morning, he introduced himself before saying anything else. Mrs. Brooks, I am Chief Michael Reynolds. First, I want to thank you for your patience. Danielle nodded politely. Thank you for coming, Chief. Reynolds glanced briefly toward Officers Walker and Bennett before returning his attention to Danielle. I understand there has been a significant misunderstanding this morning. Danielle answered carefully. Chief, I came here to resolve a payment issue. I provided proof that my bank had processed the transaction, but no one verified the information before this situation escalated. Reynolds listened without interrupting. I have already confirmed with corporate headquarters that your payment was successfully completed. There was never an unpaid fuel purchase. Danielle remained silent for a moment. She had known this outcome was likely, but hearing it officially still left her disappointed. Nearly an hour of her morning had been lost because nobody had taken the time to verify a simple banking transaction. Reynolds lowered his voice. Mrs. Brooks, there is another matter I need to clarify. Several calls were received regarding your delay this morning. During those conversations, certain information about your family became known to command staff. Danielle immediately understood. I see. Reynolds nodded. I was informed that you are married to General Marcus Brooks. A few customers standing nearby overheard the name and exchanged stunned looks. Even Officer Bennett appeared surprised. Danielle offered a small smile. Yes, Chief. Marcus is my husband. Reynolds continued. I was also informed that you were expected at a secure ceremony at Fort Cavett this morning, and that your absence triggered concern among multiple offices. Danielle nodded again. I was supposed to arrive before 10 o'clock. The chief sighed quietly. Mrs. Brooks, I want to be very clear. The information about your husband should never have been necessary. This situation should have been resolved long before anyone at Fort Cavett became involved. Danielle appreciated his honesty. I agree. By now, word had spread throughout the parking lot. Customers who had been recording earlier were openly discussing what they had learned. Frank stood near the store entrance looking pale. Officer Walker remained unusually quiet. For the first time since arriving, he appeared uncertain. Chief Reynolds walked back toward his officers. Officer Walker, Officer Bennett, I need both of you to prepare complete incident reports. Every interaction from the moment you arrived on scene must be documented. Both officers nodded immediately. Reynolds then turned toward Frank. Mr. Miller, I strongly suggest that your company review how this matter was handled. Frank swallowed nervously. Yes, Chief. Before anyone could say anything else, another black vehicle entered the parking lot. This one bore military plates. A uniformed colonel stepped out and began walking directly toward Danielle. The entire parking lot fell silent once again. Colonel Rebecca Hayes walked across the parking lot with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations. Dressed in her Army service uniform, she immediately approached Danielle and extended her hand. Mrs. Brooks, I am sorry for the delay, she said warmly. General Brooks asked that I make certain you arrived safely. Danielle smiled for the first time that morning. Thank you, Colonel. I appreciate you coming. Chief Reynolds stepped forward and introduced himself. Colonel Hayes shook his hand politely. Chief, thank you for responding personally. Reynolds nodded. Colonel, I wish this meeting were taking place under better circumstances. Hayes glanced briefly toward the officers and then back to Reynolds. I understand. Although her voice remained professional, everyone nearby sensed that this was no ordinary visit. Several customers continued recording. One video was already being streamed live on social media, and comments were appearing rapidly. People wanted to know why a senior Army officer had arrived at a rural gas station over a disputed fuel charge. Chief Reynolds quietly explained the situation, including the delayed payment confirmation and the extended detention. Colonel Hayes listened carefully without interrupting. When he finished, she thanked him and turned toward Danielle. Mrs. Brooks, Fort Cavett was concerned because you were scheduled to attend a restricted ceremony this morning. When you did not arrive and could not be reached initially, notification procedures began automatically. Chief Reynolds looked surprised. Automatic procedures? Hayes nodded. Certain events involving senior military leadership require accountability measures for immediate family members. Once Mrs. Brooks reported that she was being held unexpectedly, multiple offices became involved. Frank looked as though he wanted to disappear. Officer Bennett lowered his eyes. Officer Walker remained silent. Colonel Hayes continued, for clarification, Mrs. Brooks serves as a volunteer advisor for several military family support initiatives across the country. She is widely known throughout the command. Danielle looked slightly embarrassed. Colonel, that is not necessary. Hayes smiled. Perhaps not, but I believe context matters. At that moment, another customer approached Danielle. It was the young woman who had defended her earlier. Ma'am, I just wanted to say I am sorry for everything you went through today. Danielle thanked her sincerely. The woman then added, I recorded most of what happened. A lot of people online are already asking questions. Chief Reynolds immediately looked toward the officers. Preserve all body camera footage from this incident, he instructed. Nothing is to be deleted. Both officers acknowledged the order. Danielle noticed Walker looking increasingly distressed. For nearly an hour, he had been certain that he was dealing with a routine complaint. Now he was watching the entire situation unfold in a way he clearly had never expected. As Colonel Hayes prepared to escort Danielle to Fort Cavett, Chief Reynolds stopped her. Mrs. Brooks, before you leave, I want you to know that a formal administrative review of this incident will begin today. Danielle looked at him thoughtfully. Chief, I appreciate that. I only hope everyone remembers that this should have been resolved long before anyone needed to know who my husband is. Danielle thanked Chief Reynolds and prepared to leave with Colonel Hayes, but before she could reach the military vehicle, Officer Walker approached her. The entire parking lot grew quiet again. For several seconds, he appeared to struggle to find the right words. Finally, he spoke. Mrs. Brooks, I owe you an apology. Danielle stopped and turned toward him. Walker continued, You were cooperative from the moment we arrived. You repeatedly offered evidence, and I did not give it the consideration it deserved. I should have handled this differently. Danielle studied him carefully. She could see genuine regret in his expression. Thank you, officer, she said calmly. I appreciate you saying that. Walker nodded. I understand if you decide to file a complaint. Danielle did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked around the parking lot. Customers were still watching. Frank stood silently near the entrance, while Officer Bennett remained beside his patrol vehicle. Officer Walker, Danielle finally said, this morning was never really about me. It started because a system failed, but it escalated because assumptions were made before facts were verified. Walker lowered his eyes. You are right. Chief Reynolds stepped forward. Mrs. Brooks, regardless of whether you file a formal complaint, department policy requires a complete review. Body camera footage, witness statements, and dispatch recordings will all be examined. Danielle nodded. I understand, Chief. At that moment, Frank slowly approached. He looked far less confident than he had earlier that morning. Mrs. Brooks, he began nervously. On behalf of the station, I want to apologize. Corporate has already instructed us to issue a formal written apology as well. Danielle accepted the apology politely but did not hide her disappointment. Mr. Miller, when I walked into your store, I came looking for help. Instead, I was treated as a suspect before anyone checked the facts. Frank nodded quietly. You are absolutely right. While the conversation continued, several videos recorded by witnesses had already begun spreading online. By early afternoon, Local news stations were contacting both the police department and the gas station company for comment. The footage showed Danielle calmly offering proof of payment while repeatedly asking for someone to verify the transaction. It also showed multiple witnesses confirming that she had never attempted to leave. Public reaction was swift. Many viewers questioned why such a routine payment dispute had escalated so dramatically. Others praised Danielle for remaining composed throughout the ordeal. Later that same day, the police department released a brief statement confirming that an internal administrative review had begun. The gas station company announced that all employees at the location would receive additional training regarding payment disputes and customer interactions. As Danielle prepared to leave, Chief Reynolds walked beside her one final time. "Mrs. Brooks, I want you to know that this incident has already prompted discussions within the department. There are lessons here that we cannot ignore." Danielle smiled gently. "Chief, I hope so, because nobody should need outside phone calls, military contacts, or influential connections just to have their evidence taken seriously." Colonel Hayes drove Danielle to Fort Cavett, and despite the unexpected delay, they arrived just minutes before the ceremony began. As Danielle entered the secure auditorium, she immediately spotted Marcus standing near the front of the room, speaking with several senior officers. The moment he saw her, his expression softened. After months apart, they embraced briefly before taking their seats. "I heard enough to know that you had quite a morning," Marcus said quietly. Danielle smiled faintly. "It was not exactly how I planned to start the day." Marcus shook his head. "Colonel Hayes filled me in during the drive over. Are you all right?" Danielle nodded. "I am now." The ceremony proceeded as scheduled. Senior military leaders recognized the service and sacrifices made by dozens of military families, reminding everyone in attendance that national service extends beyond those who wear the uniform. As Danielle listened, she found herself reflecting on everything that had happened earlier that morning. She thought about how quickly assumptions had replaced facts, how easily a simple misunderstanding had escalated, and how different the outcome might have been if nobody at Fort Cavett had been expecting her arrival. Several days later, Chief Reynolds personally contacted Danielle to update her on the department's review. The investigation concluded that existing procedures for handling disputed payment incidents required significant improvement. New training was introduced emphasizing evidence verification, de-escalation, and respectful communication during all citizen interactions. The gas station company implemented similar changes across multiple locations following its own internal review. Danielle chose not to pursue legal action against anyone involved. Instead, she accepted an invitation from the police department to participate in a future community training session focused on communication and public trust. During that session, she shared a simple message with officers, employees, and community members alike. Respect cannot depend on who someone knows, what title they hold, or whose name appears on their emergency contact list, she said. Every person deserves to be heard, every concern deserves to be verified, and every interaction deserves dignity. Months later, many people still remembered the unusual morning at that small Texas gas station. Some remembered the military vehicles. Others remembered the unexpected phone calls. But those who witnessed the event firsthand remembered something else entirely. They remembered a woman who remained calm when assumptions were made about her, who responded to frustration with patience, and who used an unfortunate experience not to seek revenge, but to encourage change. Because in the end, the most important revelation was not that Danielle Brooks was married to a four-star general. It was that fairness should never require anyone to reveal who they are connected to before they are treated with respect.